Okay, so welcome to those who have arrived. I know it takes a couple of minutes. As I mentioned in the chat, we will be doing a series of polls. So just be aware that you will get polls popping up on your screen. So my name is Deirdre Caren, for those who don't know me, and for those who do, you probably know that. Today, I want to take you through a learning taxonomy. Now, a learning taxonomy is really about how's your exam structured, how's your learning structured, and what do you need to know depending on the different levels that you're working at. And I will go through just a little bit more detail as we get to the end, where you can ask, in terms of how courses are structured. But at the end of this, if you wouldn't mind just waiting with your questions until we hit the end of, kind of all the polling, etc. And then I'll open up the floor to 15 minutes of FAQs that you might have. All right, so let's get started. And yeah, welcome any faces, then I can at least see who I'm speaking with, but it's not mandatory, obviously. So thanks, Clark. All right, so when we talk about a learning taxonomy, a taxonomy just means a classification. So it's a fancy word or a fancy name for a classification system. And so what you're doing is, when you're looking at your BABOP guide or you're looking at any form of study, they look to classify your learning. What are your learning levels that you go through? So I just going to end this poll now. So you should be able to see now the results of the poll. So most of you are, looks like ECBA is the top, and most of you got this question correct, which is, what is the purpose of the BABOP guide? So the purpose of the BABOP guide is to define the profession of business analysis, as well as a commonly accepted practices. So for those who don't know much about the BABOP guide is really, like it says, a guide as to what business analysts do, what the techniques are that they use, how they use these different techniques, and how it can benefit them. So the BABOP guide is structured in this particular way. In our first two chapters, we have the key concepts. Now, this is all important. I know that some of you might know this already, but it's leading somewhere. You have key knowledge areas, chapters 3 to 8, and the knowledge areas is around what you need to do as a business analyst. You then have underlining competencies, and these are about your behavior. This is about, as a professional, how would you perform certain things. This is a very important chapter. It's underestimated by many when studying, and this is what we'll get into in a little bit more detail. Then we have techniques. There are 50 techniques in your BABOP guide that work across with your knowledge areas. So your tasks, which is what you do, and the techniques, which is how you do it, are related. There's also perspectives, where we talk about things that are related to business analysis, such as business architecture, agile, data. And so these perspectives are less important for those who are ECBA, and probably informative and need to know some of it if you are CCBA or CBAP. And then we obviously do other things within our program. So, key knowledge areas. We have, as I mentioned, 6 key knowledge areas. And a knowledge area is something that you need to learn. So as a professional, you need to know how to plan your business analysis approach. You need to be working with stakeholders to find out information and share that information, collaborate. You need to have requirements life cycle. You need to have strategy analysis, and you need to have requirements analysis and designs, and then you need to have solution evaluation. So all up, you have 30 tasks that you have to do, let's say, as a business analyst. And these tasks are broken into, so you'll see that there's a heading, there's a chapter heading, and then there's a set of tasks, and all up, this adds up to 30. And under each of those tasks, you have what I call a subtask, but the real word, according to BAPOC, is an element. And there are a set of subtasks involved in that. So all important things. This leads me to my next poll question before we look at how learning objectives work, which is going to be this one. All right, so if you can answer that question quickly, and then great. Okay, so I'll show you the answers in a minute, but let's look at a taxonomy, and particularly we're going to look at Bloom's taxonomy. So it does appear that the IIBA and your BAPOC exams are related to Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom's taxonomy is a way in which the learning is structured. So it is about how do you get from being a complete novice to working as a professional. And so when they structure exams, they look at what are the measures that is required in order for you to be able to pass any kind of test or exam. So at the first level, we're going to talk about lemons. So at the first level, let's say you want to understand what is a lemon. So just in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, a little bit of history. This was designed in the mid-1940s, and it has been updated, I think, in 2001. I think the newest release came out as to the taxonomy. So we have to start with remembering facts. So the first thing you need to do when you are studying or learning a body of knowledge is you need to remember some key facts. You need to understand those facts. You need to apply them. You need to analyze them, create with them, or evaluate them and create. So I'm going to use the example of a lemon. So when you first hear about a lemon, you've got to remember that a lemon is yellow. It is, so on level 1, you have to memorize that lemon is yellow, that it has a certain shape, that it has a certain color, it has a particular size, and that it can be sour. And that's what you need to understand in terms of your lemon on level 1. But as we go up another level, when we want to understand what does this lemon look like and what does this lemon do, you'll look to understand and decode information about this lemon. So you know that this lemon is sour. You also know that it contains vitamin C, and you know that it ripens well in sunshine. And so you can start to understand more than just the basics. You understand certain facts around this lemon that makes it unique. On the third level, we apply what we know and what we understand about this lemon, and we want to create a little bit more meaning around the lemon. So we know, because it's high in vitamin C, that this lemon will potentially when you're not feeling well, we can put it in hot water and we can use it as a way in which to, I suppose, really, as a healing type of thing. So that's what you do. You'd understand that this lemon has some features that you could use for certain things. As we go into the analyze level, we want to start to break down information into important parts. So now that we're on the fourth level, we learn to analyze that this lemon can be broken down into either a fresh lemon or into components. We know how acidic that lemon is because we can measure it, and we know that the level of measurement does depend on what state that lemon is in. So is it ripe? Is it does it just started? And what are the stages of the decomposition of the lemon? And so this lemon, from where we started with, we just know that this is a yellow lemon and it comes off a tree. We're now going into a lot more information, a lot more detail around what that lemon is. Then when we go to evaluate, we're looking at a completely different, level. We're looking at, what does a lemon look like in terms of a mandarin, for instance? What is the difference? Or an orange? How much vitamin C is there in each of these? How much fiber, vitamin A, sugars? And so we are starting to take information and value it against other forms of information. So when you hit level 5, you want to understand more about not just the lemon itself, but how does this lemon work in other areas too? How does it compare to other forms of information? And by the time that we hit level 6, which is around create, we understand that, although lemons are sour, we can make lemonade out of our lemons. So the creative process, we now know the usefulness of that lemon. We understand its colors. We understand that it's, good for health reasons. We know that you can digest it. And we know that we can turn this into some kind of product or idea. So this is what Bloom's taxonomy will be showing, is that as you learn your BAPOC guide, and as you learn anything really, there are steps to this. And so when we talk about ECBA or CCBA or CBAP, we are talking about at which levels are you having to learn and understand the BAPOC guide. And this can apply to any of your body of knowledge, because it is hopeful that they use some kind of taxonomy when they are structuring what you need to know. How do you consume the knowledge that you have? So I'm going to end this poll and we are going to dive right into this. So as you can see in this poll, the correct answer is actually 30. There are 30 tasks in your BAPOC guide. There are several elements that fall under that. And there are 6 chapters, but the question itself is how many tasks are in your BAPOC guide. So in terms of remembering, a couple of you probably didn't hit that nail on the head at the very beginning. All right, now I'm going to put you through this process. I know that some of you, I can see, have worked with me on this before, but we're going to just quickly look at the requirements classification, and I'm going to then take you through a series of polls around each level and see how everyone is scoring. So firstly, the requirements classification schema is really just a hierarchical form of the information that you're collecting for a project. So, for instance, when you are starting a project or a change or a improvement, whatever it might be, you have different levels of obtaining information. So the first one is at your business requirement level. So your business requirement is about the goals, the objectives of the organization. What is the specific outcomes? And I always say, if you're building a house, you want to know, how big is this house going to be? What are the dimensions? Is it double story, single story, high level? And then we go into stakeholders. And I use user requirements just because there's another S there. But user requirements, this is about the particular needs. Who's in the house? What does mom need? What does dad need? What do the kids need? What does the builder need? What does the architect need? How all of that comes together, because their requirements are not the same. So even though everybody wants to build a house, what they individually need is quite different. And then under solution requirements, once we've decided and we've captured everything that everybody needs, we can then go and really start to look at the solution. So what does the house look like? How exactly how will the dimensions work? What will the foundations be built of? And we break these down into two separate components. The one is functional. So this describes the capabilities that a solution must have in terms of the behavior and information of that solution. And then you have non-functional requirements. And I always say this is about how it feels. So things that is going to not necessarily about the function, but why we choose one product over another is because of the way that it performs. So a non-functional requirement does not relate directly to the behavior of a function, but rather describes the conditions under which a solution must retain effective or qualities of this that the solution must have. To remain effective. And then transitional requirements. And, if you're building a house, there's a whole moving process. So you've got to go from the house that you're in, you've got to plan for the move, you've got to decide when you're going to do the gardening, how that's going to work. And these are called transitional requirements, because we don't want to forget that we've still got to get into the house, and there's a whole process involved around that. So conditional requirements are conditions that the solution must meet to facilitate the transition from current to future state. So let's see if you remember all of this. Let's start with our first poll, our first Bloom's poll. Okay, so what type of requirement typically describes high-level organizational needs? Awesome. So the correct answer is a business requirement, as I briefly mentioned, and this is the overall goals that we are looking at. So when we're building the house, that is a business requirement, and that's the overarching goals that we're looking at. Now, it's important that at this level, and you'll notice the badges in the top right area, at this level, you are remembering certain components. So that whole Bloom's taxonomy, where you start with remember. So I've just briefly gone through that structure with you, and this is what the requirement is, that you remember what that answer is. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Dun, dun, dun. All right, so next question. We're now looking at level 2, where you need to understand. So what type of requirement contains the behavior of a solution? All right. So the important thing with this, as you can see, these questions want to check how good you are at understanding the facts. So you want to have an idea of how they've organized the information. So the first one is knowledge. We need to know what that is. But this one is more around the facts and how you interact with the facts. So most of you got it right again. It is functional requirements, and functional requirements are about the behavior of the solution. And so, so although stakeholders might want to know how the solution's working according to BABOK, that is not the correct answer. All right, so now we're going to go on to the next one, which is application. So at application level now, the question is, transition requirements are typically prepared after what requirement is completed? So you have the option of a solution requirement, stakeholder, business, or system requirement. And so when we look at level 3, what you're doing here is the application of your knowledge. You're wanting to understand the nature of how this problem is being solved. So still very simple question, but be mistaken for slightly less harmless than just a knowledge question. So you need to stay alert and not be fooled. Okay, so interesting. We only got 75% correct in this particular poll. And this happens regularly, actually, when I do this poll with people for the first time. The system requirement is not mentioned. There's no mention of system requirement. So whether you've used a system requirement or not, because it's not in the BABOK guide, it's not one of the answers. So the answer is solution requirements, yes. And remember, I spoke about the house. So you move in your house, but you've still got to know what you're building and what that building plan is before you can move the house. So it's directly related to the solution. Because only when we know what we're building will we know when we can actually move house and have all of those other conditions met. Okay, so next level. Now we're going to look at analysis. Now you'll notice that ECBA has been removed from there because typically we don't do ECBA level questions at this side. Now I want to be clear with all of this is that when I'm showing you some of these things, it's there to help you learn. This isn't a law book that I'm giving you, so they may prescribe some questions in ECBA that are related to this, but just giving you a bit of a heads up. So our next poll, we're looking at capture the process. Processes are listed as a technique in chapter 10.34 of your BABOK guide. Which of these requirements apply and which one doesn't? So except which one? So these ones are always a bit tricky because you must make sure that you know what except means, and you need to relate it to the technique that's been used, so how it's been used. And all of those components matter in your answer. All right, so let me show you the results of that poll. Okay, so the majority of you got it right. However, the majority went from 95% to 46%, showing the levels now have changed significantly. So as you can see, as you go into your CCBA and your CBAP level questioning, the levels have a significant change to them. So the reason why it's transitional is because if you look at what the person is doing, they're working with the stakeholder, they're capturing the current state process, and they are, basically working on how it functions. That's what they're doing. So there's no way to know just yet. So although it'll form part of the solution requirements, there's no ways to know yet what the transition requirements will be. And this is why that is not what's happening in this particular case. So these can be tricky, and they do like to ask accept questions, which is very annoying. My advice is to make sure that you can see that first, and then you realize it's a process of elimination. Let's go to our next poll. Now we're going to look at evaluate. So evaluate, although it sounds impressive, the evaluate question. Now remember what we were comparing lemons with mandarins. And so you're starting to pull a whole lot of pieces together. That's what you need to do in the evaluate stage. Okay, so let me end this poll now. So yes, the majority got it right. That's great. What this question has done is it's brought in the character of a business analyst. So chapter 9, we talk about what does a professional look like, and obviously arguing and blaming and all of those things is not really professional qualities. So the answer is B, which is state all the facts in a neutral way, because you're there to provide the information, but not necessarily to express your personal opinions, etc. So according to Babak, when you look at these scenarios, this is what has been happening, and then you have to pull together why you would behave in a certain way in response to that. So what they start to do at this level is they're starting to pull in, and this is important in Babak, they're starting to pull in related items from this chapter and that chapter and how that all fits together. And so the questions are around your reasoning ability, but you also need to understand that the questions don't mean that you answer it per chapter like you would, let's say, in the first 4. You have to reason through some of the learnings that you've had in the different chapters. Okay, now we get to a bit more of a tricky one, even though it doesn't look tricky. Now we're looking at creating. So a slightly less aggressive question. These expect you to make judgments about the value of the ideas and the materials. And the caution is, as with the other questions, approach carefully, no sudden moves. Again, we've got this right. 56% business case is the correct answer. But the question is why? Because business goals is a very, that's a high-level business requirement. So why would a business case be the correct answer in this? Now, when you get to this level, and particularly CBAP, CCBA, you should be happy you shouldn't get these types of questions because they're kind of tricky. But, oh, sorry, let me show the results again. So the reason why business case is the answer is around the language. So to document, remember, we spoke about techniques, and techniques in chapter 10 has a list of techniques that are referred to as techniques. So when you use the word to document, it's implying that you are creating something, and the how would be an option. Whereas firstly, project mandate, I'm glad no one put that in there. Those words do not exist in your Babak guide. So if they do, then sorry, but I don't see them anywhere. That is a project manager role, so they won't bring that in. Solution approach, you could say that would be helpful because it's linked to the solution approach in your chapter 6.4.4, but they're asking around documenting it. So it's going to be, what technique should we use to do this? A business goal is a high-level business requirement, and it's not a document per se. It's not what you're doing, it's what you use to help with this. So it's a bit of a tricky answer, but this is where you have to tread carefully. So in language, when they term something that has to do with a technique, or what you're doing or how you're doing something, then you can't use the things that relate to the overall goals or, how, like just generally what would seem like a good answer. So keep this in mind when you're working and looking at your questions. What might seem like a simple question actually has a few more challenges. So of the 10 techniques, only one technique exists in these options, and that is business case. And that's why that is the correct answer. And then another one for you. Last of our polls. Thought I'd throw an additional one in just to get everybody thinking. So this is where Babok likes to ask about creating rules. So the correct answer, 50% of people got that correct. And this is because it's linked to chapter 3 let me just check which one that is. Chapter 3.2.4.1 of your Babok guide, and talking about the attitudes towards a project, and that you need to do a risk analysis if you find that there might be detractors in your project. So well done to half of the people who got that correct. All of these are reasonable answers. All of these are reasonable answers. And this is what makes CBAP particularly difficult, because, the average person might have adopted different ways of doing things in, your daily life, especially those who've been BAs for a long time. And so all of this makes sense. Like, you could do any of these things, but you have to relate it back to what is in your Babok guide. And that's what makes the whole thing pretty tricky. So this is the end of our polls. I've still got lots to take you through, but did anyone want to ask any questions while we're here, so that I can just move in and out a little bit? If you do, just put up your hand. Or so as you know, we've got the different levels of certification with your IIBA. So ECBA, we look at 1 to 3 levels of your Bloom's taxonomy. Obviously, CCBA, you're looking at going a little bit higher than that, but not quite going to the create rules level. And then your CBAP is around your higher levels. So in terms of your ECBA, when you study your Babok guide, you want to remember, you want to recall facts. So if they call something verify, then you need to know what the word verify means. If they say, would you validate first or verify first, you need to understand what that means. And you need to apply things. And so you would say, when they say things like, when would you validate a requirement, you need to be able to apply that knowledge. So according to Babok, you have to follow rules. So you have to adhere to prescribed ways. That's in Babok, which means whatever's in Babok is the right answer. They're not going to trick you in terms of trying to make you pull up a whole bunch of information, but you need to follow the guidelines as prescribed by Babok. You need to understand, recognize key elements. So you need to be able to pull one element to another element. Like I said, in the case of chapter 7.2 and chapter 7.3 of your BABOK guide, which is one's verify and the other one's validate, you might have to pull those two concepts together. And then remember basic facts. So you need to know the difference between, let's say, what is a solution requirement and what is a functional requirement. And you need to remember that a system requirement is not the same as a solution requirement. So CCBA, you have to know these things, but they don't ask you specific questions around this. They assume you're already at this level. And this is important because a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm just going to focus on this. And no, you can't do that because they're assuming that you already know all of this. And now you are starting to look at evaluating, analyzing, and applying the concepts. So for CCBA, you look to modify rules. So when they talk about modifying rules, they say encounter situations where you will have to choose the best option. So you are looking at, like I say, the requirements, and there might be a situation where you would say, actually, I should probably use this first. So when they call modify the rules, if your BABOK says, first we validate or verify our requirements and then we validate the requirements, it might ask you a question that asks you to modify that slightly. But you will see that is already reasonably structured in your BABOK guide, how there are multiple what we call inputs and outputs that will help you make that decision. You would recommend actions. So you'd basically be breaking down the important components of your BABOK guide, and you would look at what should happen. So when we're doing this, what should a BA do? And you will apply your facts. So you'll have a basic understanding of the techniques, of the stakeholders involved, of the tasks that are involved. So you need to apply them in certain contexts. And then, as you can imagine, you need to know all of this as a CBAP, and that needs to intrinsically sit in your knowledge. And then you need to be able to really understand these three levels. So when they say create rules, so it's almost like they give you a scenario and they say, how would you deal with this particular scenario? And they use the term rules because I suppose they can't say create a requirements document. So they say create basically a decision. I use the word decision because I find it easier to understand than the word rule. But basically create a decision that will allow you to have the best results. And this is where they want that creativity. They also want you to evaluate different conditions. So what they'll do is they'll take a chapter condition, when you're performing a particular task or element, and then they'll take another chapter and they'll put the two together, and they'll ask you what is the best answer. And again, language is so important. If they say, what tool should you use or what technique should you use? Those are separate things altogether, and they listed separately in your BABOK guide. If they say which element or which task or which attribute, they all mean very specific things. So be very aware of the language that BABOK uses, because that's half of your test is the language. And then obviously breaking down, so advanced knowledge, they expect you to know how to use tools. And so you have to know things like financial analysis. You have to know things like use case, user stories, data analysis. All of these things you're expected to be able to break down a case. Like let's say you're doing a data model and they're going to ask you what happens next. So that's fundamentally the difference between ECBA, CCBA, and CBAP. And the important thing is you're all learning your BABOK guide, but it's the degree of the learning that changes and the degree of the understanding, which is what you're being tested on. So in terms of your competency, I'm just going to do a quick poll. Just quickly launch that. On have you found the Bloom's taxonomy helpful? And we'll go into just a few key things to note in this. What is the time? Oh, okay. So I'm going to just speed up a little bit, and then we can go into any Q&A that someone might have. So as you can see in your business analysis, you've got your knowledge areas and you've got your underlying competencies. So the competency is what you do as a business analyst. And then the knowledge areas is what the business analyst profession needs to be able to do. So what BAs do, and this is your behavior, the underlying competencies for you to be able to perform that task. Just as a note, in every single chapter of your BABOK guide, you will notice that there's an underlining competency in each element. So under the task, remember there are 30 tasks, and then under the task itself, there are elements, and there is a underlining competency for every single element in your BABOK guide. And so when they ask you to understand something, you should now know that you're working at this level. So when you look at a particular task and they say you need to understand this, that's the level. If they say you need to follow rules, and let's just go to ECBA level, you need to apply whatever they have prescribed in that particular element. So just bear in mind, every element in your BABOK guide has an associated learning objective and measure. And so when you have an exam question, this is the underlying measure of the exam that you're having. So this is all available to you. Understanding it is probably the biggest challenge. So that is me for today. And now any questions? I'm going to end this poll. I'm glad to see that the majority found this very helpful. Oh, yes. All of these components are part of the masterclass that we actually do. You can, for those who aren't already registered, you can have a free preview, which actually talks about your learning blueprint. Welcome to just go onto the site and have a look at it yourself and get more information on your learning, kind of blueprint and how it's structured. So this type of stuff. But other than that, does anyone have a question? Like a voice would be nice, because I feel like I'm just talking to myself.
I have a question.
Is there a passing score? Yes. Clark, let's answer your question.
Yeah, thank you. I have signed up for the ECBA course, and I'm a little confused on whether the BABOK guide comes with the course, or do we need to purchase that separately?
Yeah, you have to purchase it separately because the body of knowledge is by the IIBA, so we're not allowed to do that. But that's what we train. We train on the BABOK guide. So you can go for your normal learning, but that doesn't mean, I think it's more helpful to have it with you while you learn.
Sure. Thank you.
Do we need to memorize each and every component? No, you don't. But I understand that when you look at the learning objectives, that can seem quite overwhelming, which is usually why I don't give too much information around these things. What you do need to know is the language. So you do need to, I'll help you in a minute, Victor, you do need to know that a technique is different to a tool, which is different to, a guideline, which is different to a task, which is different. So you have to know those basics, and you have to memorize each task in terms of their description. So what does that task do? That's my advice to everyone. The rest you can sort of figure out as you go along the path. Victor, you had a question.
Yes, hello. And first of all, thank you very much for your time and providing us with this useful information. I was wondering whether during the exam, the questions are like timed, so you have certain time to answer and move forward to the next one.
So depending on what exam you're working on, and if you're in a center or you're online, but they all have a deadline. So CBAP, for instance, is 3.5 hours, and you have to answer 120 questions. So it's approximately 3 minutes, I think. So I could get that wrong. Don't judge me on the maths. And you can move in and out. So you can pause a question and come back to it. You're not allowed to have anything with you. So you're not allowed to have any guidebooks or anything like that. It's a closed book exam. You can only have some water and a piece of paper with you, blank piece of paper. So for your ECBA, it's a much simpler exam. So it's an hour, 50 minutes, or 50 questions. So a question per minute. So much easier to cope with. And then CCBA is very close to CBAP, by the way. You have more questions. You have 130 questions in 3 hours, but they are simpler questions. So you don't get that level of complexity. So same thing applies. You can move in and out of the question bank. But once you hit submit, I'm finished then it's done.
You got it. Thank you very much.
No worries. Yes, Salim, thanks for saying you get it. You get the BABA guide free as a member with IIBA. How can I better understand on the CBA course? Prasad, just send me an email. But basically, your ECBA is at your very simple level. Yes, ECBA is also a closed book exam. All of them are closed books, so there isn't enough time anyway to try cipher through the BABA guide. Oh, thank you, Stephanie. Yes, passed the first time.
Passed the first time.
Awesome. So, yeah, I don't know if there are any more questions, but look, in terms of your learning, I think it's always important to understand that they're testing you on every element that they're going through, and they want to make sure you have the right language skills. The 3 questions that I showed you on an ECBA level are very simple, and it's basically you just want to remember, oh yes, this technique does this, or this task, this is the purpose of this particular task. So it's pretty simple. And so I always say to ECBAs, and I know they freak out a lot, but don't worry too much. Just follow the process. Follow the steps that we prescribe for you. I say that for all levels. I've done mock exams that are 3.5 hours, because a 3.5 hour exam sounds okay, but if you're not prepared for it, you're going to be exhausted, and that's not ideal. Your CBAP, your ECBAs, an hour is completely doable. You know, there's not too much of a challenge. For those who are close to a Prometric center, most people say it's better to go and actually do the exam at the Prometric center, because it, you know, they manage all the technology for you. But with all of the lockdowns and various things going on around the world, at least you do have the option to do an online exam. There's quite a lot of work involved in making sure you don't have anything lying around and everything's clear and your Wi-Fi is working. I see there's some more questions. Where can we access mocks? So we do provide mock exams through our program. I will ask just a thank you email will be sent from this session, and you'll, as well as the recording of the session, get sent to everybody, and we'll put a reference on how you can find that information. Bianca, you have your exam on February the 7th. Good luck with that. So nervous, yes. Good luck with that. Other
Thank
than
you.
the BABOK, are there any other situation tests, papers? There's quite a few that you can have a look around. Like I said, go have a look at what we have, and you will get an email with a link of all the free resources that you can make use of. I just want to make sure I'm covering everyone's question here. So yes, practice exams, you'll get on the link. All right.
Sorry,
Thanks,
quick
everybody.
question.
Yes.
About the Islam.
Hi, Islam. Hi. Sorry,
Hi.
it's just a wall of names.
I know, that's all right. Yeah, this has been really helpful. Thank you so much for putting this together. I just had a quick question about the drills. Do we have a way to access a full, like, 3.5 hour simulation of an exam? I don't know if you answered that question already, but
yeah, we do have it as part of our masterclass. So that's, you know, you would go into what we call the drills course specifically, which has about 1,000 different types of questions. We are continually updating a lot at the moment, so there will be new stuff coming in very soon. I don't like to say that too early, but within the next month. And so you can use those mock tests to really go, you know, prepare for that. We do have Test Your Knowledge of BABOK, which is really around the elements, which I always say to people, as you're going through your learning, that's a really simple program that you can use to just make sure that you've understood every chapter and how that is all broken down. So everything is in our masterclass that you're asking for. And obviously there's a lot of free resources as well that we do provide, and more than happy to share, like the summary guide of your BABOK guide that you get from Alan. There's some practice tests. So there's a lot available. Okay.
Hello.
Good.
Hello.
Yes. Hi.
Hi. Hi. I have a question. So what is the difference between ECBA Masterclass 2020 and 22 and the other masterclass?
We did a very minor upgrade where we converted to subtitles to include subtitles.
Okay.
So the 2022 version has subtitles and multiple languages, and allows you to speed up and slow down if areas weren't well understood. So that's the only significant difference. Minor tweaks, you know. I might have, like, sometimes I might have described something and then I thought, oh, maybe I need to just add a little bit to that. So very minor tweaks.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
But good question, because we're going to take the dates off soon. Oh, thanks, Leah. Okay, so I'm going to say goodbye, everybody. It's been great as usual. big crowd. It's been really good. Look forward to our email. Please just get in touch if you want to email us or ask me more questions. I'm on LinkedIn. It's pretty obvious, so you can get in touch with me there. And so if you have any more questions, please do that, or just go have a look at our site. And like I said, you'll get links to the free resources and a copy of this webinar later, not maybe today, maybe early tomorrow. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to end the session now, and you'll get a copy of the recording. Really appreciate your participation.